The voice of women, the voice of women, 91.7.
Welcome to the conversations at the invitation of the media women, and we're talking about the importance of protecting her. And our guest is all ready and waiting. If anybody did Google this woman, they'll find tons and tons of information about her. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that she describes herself as one of us, because she's actually an author and a writer of repute. In recent times, two very important pieces that she wrote went viral. One was on the case of the rapper and how women are usually a cover for each other. Our guest, as we are live on WFM 917, is Irelu Bisi Fayemi, who is the wife of the executive governor of Ekiti State. Our bio, I'll just do a quick one. Off the top of my head, I don't even need to know, because to me, she's a sister and somebody with shared interests. But there's much more than that. She's a social entrepreneur. She's a policy advocate. She's a feminist. She's an activist, a gender and development specialist with a BA and an MA from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University. And but she co-founded the African Women's Development Fund, the first Africa-wide grant-making foundation for women's organizations based in Ghana, and served as the first CEO from 2001 to 2010. She led the campaign in Ekiti State to enact the gender-based violence prohibition law in 2011 and was revised in 2019. And she is chair of the Ekiti State AIDS Control Agency. But what I love best about her is her ability to use language and to move people. Loud Whispers, if you haven't read it, better get one for yourself. And she wrote that book, and she also co-edited Voice, Power, and Soul with Jessica Horn in 2008. Our guest is Irelu Bisi Fayemi. You're welcome. We thank you for joining us at such a short notice. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here to have this conversation with you. When Sister Tone got in touch with me a few weeks ago to ask me to do this, she said the reason is because there have been some healthy conversations amongst you about the kind of reactions or responses we should have when we hear the stories of women who have been victims or survivors of various forms of gender-based violence. So I'm really happy that you have decided, as this group of prominent professional women, to put this on your agenda. And I hope we can have a really nice conversation. So I just start off by sharing some things with you, and then we can enter into an interactive session. Now, when we talk about gender-based violence, we are, of course, talking about different kinds of situations that end up undermining or devaluing the personhood of mostly women. Although we acknowledge that men and boys can also be victims, and hence that's why it's called gender-based violence. It used to be called violence against women. But there is also a consensus that 98% of the time, we are talking about violence against women and girls. So now, there are different kinds of violence against women and girls, as we all know, or gender-based violence. We have physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and economic violence. By the time we look at what goes into this holistic definition of what constitutes gender-based violence, and the fact that conventional statistics tell us that 1 out of every 3 women is a survivor of one form of violence or the other. As we have this meeting today, and I understand that there are at least 100 of us on this platform, as we have this meeting today, what that then means is at least 30 of the women who are part of this conversation have been through one form of violence or the other in their lifetime. It could be physical, it could be sexual, it could be psychological, or it could be economic. And so I wanted to start off with letting us understand that this conversation is about us. it is not about some women out there. It's about us as women, as mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and so on. And so when these issues come up, we need to start by looking at the things that either we have gone through or the women close to us have gone through. I'd like to share a couple of brief stories with you. And then at the end, I'll ask us a couple of questions. The first story, and all these three stories are true stories. I didn't just make them up. And they also happen to be stories that I have been involved in one way or the other by knowing the people who have been affected. The first story I'll tell is about a 13-year-old girl. I will call her Bola. Bola was pregnant, and she was brought to me a couple of years ago. And it turned out, after a long, long story, we found out that 3 different men had been having sexual intercourse with her. One of these men is, or was at the time, a police officer. One of the men who had been sleeping with her was someone who sold bread. And the third one was someone who sold rice and gari for his mother. So these 3 different men were sleeping with this 13-year-old, and she got pregnant. Now, we might, so let me leave that case aside. And then there's the case of a woman who I will call Auntie Sade. Auntie Sade is a political person. She was involved in a rally a couple of years ago, a long time ago actually. She was attending a rally with, of course, Muslim men, and then a fight broke out. Police rounded them up at this fight, and as some of our law enforcement officers can be, very unthinking, cruel, and wicked, they locked her up in a cell with some of the men who they had picked up. And so there were over 10 men in this cell. She was locked up there with them. And some of these men proceeded to rape her, one after the other. And after some time, one of the men in the cell, who was someone she was familiar with, he had to throw himself over her to protect her from these men and to say, you need to stop this. This is not right. So the third one, let me call her Gloria. She was a student in one of our universities. She was dating a boy who turned out to be the member of a cult. Now, in the cult, they had disagreements over leadership. He wanted the cult to operate in a certain way, and there were others who wanted to do things in ways that they felt were not appropriate. So in the midst of all this power tussle, his rivals in the cult decided to teach him a lesson. So they kidnapped Gloria, they raped her, and not only did she end up being raped, she also ended up with HIV. So those are 3 different cases. And so we might want to ask ourselves, in the case of Bola, what was a small girl of 13 doing sleeping with 3 men? Some people who heard about it said, what's a promiscuous little girl starting to like sex at such an early age? In the case of Auntie Sade, the political activist, what was she doing going around rebelling in politics? She got what she deserved. And in the case of Gloria, it is her fault that she went out with a cultist. Couldn't she find any other boy to go out with on campus, and she ended up going out with a cultist? And so she got raped. It must have been her fault. If any of these 3 women was related to us in any way, would we be asking them those questions? All of us know Ebola in our lives. All of us might have known an Auntie Sade, and all of us might have known a Gloria. And so when we come across these cases, for someone like me who has worked on these issues for a long time, we should not be laying the blame and placing the shame on the people who are the ones who have suffered. And mark my words, all these three women are going to suffer for the rest of their lives, one way or the other. They will never forget the trauma that they've been through. And so instead of laying the blame or the shame at the doorsteps of those who happen to be victims and who we prefer to call survivors, because being a survivor means that you are taking back control over your life, we need to be placing the blame and the shame squarely at the doorsteps of the perpetrator. So regardless of the context, regardless of the circumstances, as mothers, as sisters, as grandmothers, we should not find ourselves asking questions like, you know, what were you wearing? What were you doing there? How come this happened to you? Because it can happen to anyone. And remember, I began with what I believe is a holistic definition of gender-based violence. Any one of us could be a victim of gender-based violence. And I'm sure as I speak, there are some survivors on this platform right now. So my dear sisters, let us try and use whatever platforms we have to raise awareness, to show empathy, to show compassion, and work together to ensure that we make our society, even if we can't make it GBV free, to at least ensure that we create enough safe spaces where we can protect one another and we can support one another as women without labeling ourselves unnecessarily. So I'll stop there for now so that we can have a conversation.
Feishayo Jagede wants to talk, ma'am.
Okay, Feishayo, please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Excellency. This is a very commendable initiative. We are grateful. We need to have wife of governors that are like you. And I will suggest that you also see how you can work with other wives of other governors in Nigeria. I work on HIV program in Nigeria. Majority of the problem of this rape cases in Nigeria are as a result of not the cases now. Those cases that occur, they are presented in the hospital very late. Any case that are presented after 72 hours cannot receive the post-exposure prophylaxis, at least to prevent the HIV that might occur as a result of the rape. Can you help us to work with other state government on addressing this issue of this rape? Needs to be reviewed and modified to make sure that there is a stiffer penalty for people that are raped. In other countries, I have seen where they even give anybody that rape people an injection that make him not to be able to even have sexual intercourse with people. This is just my comment.
My name is Clarice Azatalam. Please, I want to know what pushes men to indulge in this rape, because the rate of rape in Nigeria is very high these days.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. We appreciate your question. So I think I would let Ewelu just address those two, getting other state governors' wives to think like she does, and what legal action, what legal activities are in place to ensure that there's less people getting away with perpetration like that. And then the question on why do men rape? I think, I'm not sure if she can answer that, but you know, Erelu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sister Deswa. Thank you, Mr. Feishayo. I don't know how many of you are aware that a few weeks ago, some of us governors' wives came together to establish a working group known as Nigerian Governors' Wives Against Gender-Based Violence. And the reason why we did that was because we wanted to work together as governors' wives to raise awareness around these issues and to use our respective platforms in our state to engage in advocacy and provide a whole different kinds of support to address this issue. We cannot do things in our different states, but we are stronger when we come together. And one of the very important things that we did, in fact, the first thing that we did was we wrote a memo to the Nigerian Governors Forum, our husbands, and we demanded of our husbands that they should declare a state of emergency on gender-based violence in Nigeria. And our husbands agreed. And on June 10th, please, you can Google this, and the information is out there. And I'll be quite happy to also send you the memo from the Governors Forum so you can share it on your platform. On the 10th of June, the Nigerian Governors Forum declared a state of emergency on gender-based violence. Now, what this state of emergency means is that each governor will go back to their state and do what they can to ensure that they speed up action on GBV issues. In addition to declaring this state, getting our husbands to declare this state of emergency, we came up with an action plan as wives of governors for us to be able to work on these issues in our state. Some of us are pretty advanced in terms of where we are on these issues, and some of the states are just beginning to find out what needs to be done. But briefly, let me share the different features of this plan, because it's very important to this conversation we are having and the issues that Mr. Fishayo raised. So first of all, in our action plan, we are looking at legal and policy frameworks. We cannot mitigate gender-based violence if there are no laws to protect women and children. We have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015, which every state is supposed to domesticate. And so far, only 15 states out of 36 have domesticated the VAP Act. And so we need to make sure that every state in Nigeria domesticates the VAP Act. And there are still a number of states, especially in northern Nigeria, who have not domesticated the Child Rights Act. Without these two critical pieces of legislation, it's going to be difficult to enforce GBV protection and prevention. The second feature of our plan is around treatment, care, and protection of GBV survivors. And under this, every state in Nigeria has to have what we call a Sexual Assault Referral Center, or SAC for short. If a rape has just happened, it is at this SAC that we can quickly administer what Mr. Fisher was referring to, post-exposure prophylaxis, to prevent HIV/AIDS, to prevent STDs or pregnancy. And if we don't have these facilities available, it's going to be difficult, to support survivors and enable them heal. And part of this treatment, care, and protection is also ensuring that we all have a place where we can provide shelter for GBV survivors. Again, most states in Nigeria do not have shelters where we can keep women in distress. And the very few shelters that we have are run by NGOs. So I'm pleased to let you know that in Ekiti State, for example, we've always had a shelter since 2013, my husband's first term. And we regard it as a temporary shelter because in 2 months' time, we are going to be opening up the permanent one. And then we just recently opened our own sexual assault referral center known as the Morimi Clinic. Another feature of this action plan that we are working on as governors' wives is education and reorientation for prevention. You have to change people's mindsets. You have to change people's attitudes and beliefs. And this is where I will then link this to the second question I was asked about what pushes men to rape. Well, men go out there and rape because they feel a sense of entitlement to women's bodies. And the patriarchal societies that we live in, which are characterized by patriarchal norms, values, and beliefs, presuppose that women and their bodies are readily available to men to take ownership of, to possess, and to use as they wish. And so that is what gives men the audacity to pounce on women and children as well and rape them. So we need to engage in a whole process of education and reorientation so that we bring up boys who will grow up into men who understand the notions of consent and understand that women's bodies are not just there for them to pounce on and use. And another key feature we are looking at is community education or community ownership. If we don't, for example, engage with our grassroots communities, our traditional rulers, our religious leaders, opinion leaders at local level, it's going to be difficult for us to sustain this work. And of course, at the national level and at state level, we need a coordinating mechanism. And so one of the things we are trying to make sure happens is every state should have a committee made up of statutory agencies and civil society organizations who can provide a range of services and support for GBV victims. So Yes, so there's a whole lot, that, we are planning to do, but I think I'll just stop there for now.
But that gives us comfort that you know that the governor's wives are working together and you've at least started moving with the declaration of the state of emergency. That's clear that there's something going on. I have people who are raising their hands, and I'll just ask 5 of them to please go ahead and ask their questions. And it's comforting to know that you guys are working. I appreciate that, especially if it's State. I have Edomawo Udeme.
My question is, so for Excellency, in the last, from January to July, the IG of the police reported that there have been 717 death cases in the country reported. And those are only reported cases because the environment I am right now, I'm handling over 25 cases of rape. I live somewhere in between Abuja and Nasarawa State. And most of them have not been reported because they are either ashamed of something or whatever. Now my question
what's your question, please?
Is there any way we can have a speedily justice system where these things can be done almost immediately for people to get justice and be happy that they've achieved it? Because what is happening there, among those 717 cases, I doubt if there has been any justice on the case for now. So what can be done for a speedy justice system?
Thank you, ma'am. Shola, are you still there? Go ahead, ma'am.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. My name is Dr. Shola Omidirun. I'm based in the US. I have a question, and then I guess I also have a comment. My question is, first to also include or ask Erelu, in taking care of the victims of this gender-based violence, are there components to ensure the psychological and emotional well-being of these folks? Those are deep-rooted. Sometimes, the physical trauma is evident, and we can do a lot to take care of that. But what do we have in place? What are our plans to make sure that subsequently and long-term their emotional well-being, they begin to heal? Poverty, poverty, poverty. I know the education is important, but what resources can such young people, big people access so that they don't fall prey? I'll speak Yoruba real quick. When poverty at the basic level can be taken care of.
Thank you. I think you should just mute yourself. We get the general idea, so we can move on. I don't know if Kumbi is still there with her question.
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
My question has to do with recent statistics that I've heard, that for every one person who comes out to say that they've been abused, you have close to 8 to 10 others who have not come out. And I think the reason this is happening is because of stigmatization. So how do we ensure that those who come out are not stigmatized, and to encourage those who have not come out to come out? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll let her respond to those questions, but as she does that, I want to remind all of us, the aim of this conversation is really to focus on the idea of who should be blamed. The typical thing is to blame. When we blame the victim, we're not doing what is right. So I just wanted to refocus our attention to that. Will kindly address those questions if I bring some more people on?
With regards to speeding up the justice system, that's absolutely important. It's not, easy to get a quick turnaround on these cases. But I'd also like to mention that there is such a high rate of sabotage of these cases. And that is why these sexual assault referral centers are very important, so that we can collect the forensic evidence that is required to sustain a prosecution. And we also have communities, families, sabotaging efforts as well. When a case gets to a point where it is quite clear that the case is going to court and there's going to be a conviction, then the families come and start begging, and they refuse to cooperate, and everything falls apart. So that, makes a difference in terms of the outcomes that we have from these trials. On the issue of psychological and emotional well-being, it goes without saying, you cannot provide support for GBV survivors without the appropriate psychosocial support on the short, medium to long term. It is absolutely impossible. And I don't even think, I thought that was implied when I said we have sexual assault referral centers in place. Apart from looking at the physical or medical issues that need to be addressed, psychosocial support is of absolute importance, as well as everything else. So that goes without saying. On the issue of women and poverty, absolutely. And that's why we keep saying, if you really want, a lot of the things we are dealing with when we are addressing GBV issues, most times we are dealing with the symptoms. And the root causes are, of course, the low status of women in our communities. Brought about by culture, tradition, and religion, and also the poor economic status of women as well. And that is what makes it easy for young girls, for example, to be manipulated into transactional sex and all kinds of unsavory activities. So in terms of making interventions, it's important for governments to prioritize women's economic empowerment and livelihoods, so that we can reduce the vulnerability of women and their children. And as we speak, there are a couple of women that we are working with right now in my state, as we try and address their immediate issues around being GBV survivors, ensuring that they have alternative accommodation, ensuring that their children stay in school, also providing them with resources to ensure that they can continue their lives without having to fall back into those circumstances that made them vulnerable in the first instance. Our own GBV law in Ekiti State has what we call a survivors fund attached to it. And it's the first of its kind in Nigeria. And this survivors fund is used to help GBV survivors rebuild their lives after their experiences, so that they can continue with the next stage of their lives. On the issue of stigma and reporting, absolutely, there's a huge stigma attached, to specifically sexual violence. And as I said earlier, even those who are willing to come forward to report, other members of the family, they sabotage the effort and prevent people from coming forward. So now what we keep saying to people is it's important to come forward, particularly in terms of sexual assault, so that we can provide the required, immediate medical assistance and psychosocial support. If we are not able to get a conviction, or if we are not able to identify suspects, that's a different conversation. But we need to have a process that focuses on treatment, care, and recovery of the GBV survivors.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I must note at this point that we can do this for 3 hours. But we've already said we're going to do a 1-hour conversation, so we're going to round up at 7:10. However, by popular demand, if we so desire, we can have part 2 and even part 3. I must call on people who've had their hands up to speak, but I would like to appeal to them that can we take this back to the whole essence of the conversation, which is blaming her and not blaming, who should you be blaming? And I'd like to ask Rita. Queen Rita has been up. I apologize for not calling you before now. Please, 1 minute. Queen Rita, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Auntie Adesua. Her Excellency, thank you so much, ma'am. We do appreciate you for all you have been doing for gender all this while. God bless you, ma'am. My main concern when it comes to blaming or who should be blamed is the role of our security agency, ma'am. Our security agencies are supposed to protect victims. But what we find out most of the time is that they actually re-victimize the victims of rape. Just this past week, a gender activist, Dorothy Ndemanzi, was arrested by the police because she intervened in a case of gender-based violence. And they claim it is a family matter, so she was not supposed to be involved in this case.
So what's your question, Rita? That's an observation. We appreciate it. We are losing you.
and all this gender issue. And I'm glad to hear you and the other governor's wife are working on something fantastic. How can you make sure, through whatever means, that our police officers, the police in general, are better aware and know that they are actually doing the opposite of what they are supposed to do, protecting victims, and then they are blaming them instead? Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Queen Rita. As we do that, if Tina Uche is still there, thank you, Queen. If Tina is there, can you please ask your question quickly?
Your Excellency, good evening, ma'am. I rather stand on the existing protocol.
Hello, please mute yourselves kindly, everybody. Akpe Obaje, mute yourself. Tina should be speaking. Obaje, mute yourself. Tina, go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. You made mention of the governors coming together. We are aware.
Governors' wives.
Governors' wives declared the state of emergency on rape, and they came back to. You went back to your state and started, and in addition to what you've been doing before. I want to ask you, ma'am, based on that declaration, do you have checks and balance to watch out for other states? I don't want to talk about the North because we don't want to go there because they claim that that is their culture, that is their tradition. I'm talking about Southwest and Southeast that are taking this thing seriously. Is there checks and balance within the Governor's Wives Forum to check? Because where I am, the situation is not the same. One. Two, secondly, ma, is there a way the governor's wife can advise the ministry, the commissioners for education to have a designated hospital, general hospital that the victims can go for text examination and treatment? I have a scenario. 10-year-old child was raped by a boyfriend of the sister. And she was there at the police station for 3 days without no examination, no treatment. And when we came in, police say where we go see money, where we go take and go hospital. Is there a way, ma'am?
Thank you, Tina. You are raising the question about where they can go to report, and also the first question on security. Erelu, kindly take the floor. And I'm going to release my survey question in a few moments. Do we want part 1 or part 2? Part 2 of this, and all I want from you is yes or no. Erelu, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, right. So with regards to the issue of security agencies, sadly, I have to agree that, a lot of times our law enforcement agencies do not really help. And this is where I usually advocate for a pressure cooker approach. For those of us who are familiar with the way pressure cookers work, you cook your food with steam from above and steam from below. The Inspector General of Police needs to take a firm stand on this issue. The uniformed forces listen to their organs at the top. And so when we are talking about a state of emergency, it does not just apply to state governments. My own understanding is that it should apply to all instruments of governance. The National Assembly, the Inspector General of Police, the judiciary, even private entities. We all need to have our own version of a roadmap, what it would mean for us to have a roadmap towards ending GBV. We would like the Inspector General of Police to take a firm stance on this from the top and let it be known throughout the rank and file that certain acts of intimidation, of shaming the victim, of intimidating victims and their families will not be tolerated. And then also we need to be able to empower our communities, women's organizations, community activists, people like my young sister, Dorothy Manze,
hold on,
who has been working so hard. Hello?
Adegbero Kende, please mute your mics. Erelu, I apologize. Please go ahead.
People like, my young sister, Dorothy Njemanze, who has been working on these issues in Abuja over and over again. We need to get the police leadership and the senior hierarchy to let it be known throughout the force that these acts are in contravention of the VAP Act of 2015. They are the ones who are supposed to be custodians of these laws. They are the ones who are supposed to be interpreting these laws for the benefit of the communities, of the taxpayers who make it possible for them to wear these uniforms. But we also need to arm ourselves with this information so that when we encounter these issues in our communities, we bring it to the attention of their bosses, really, because they have listened to all the radio jingles been putting out there about reporting abuse. They went to report a case of suspected defilement of a minor. It turned out that it wasn't a case of defilement, it was a case of a bacterial infection. But then the police then turned around and told the family that they had to pay them 200,000 naira. Otherwise, they were going to go and report them to the governor's wife that they were responsible for defiling their child. And so now the police, the parents, everybody, they are now in serious trouble because we want to get to the root of that matter. And the police who try to extort that money, they are in extra trouble because we are going to make sure that, they go and look for work elsewhere, but not in our state. Now, on the issue of ensuring that there's a place where victims can go, that is the point I was making earlier about the Sexual Assault Referral Center. It is not the job of the Minister of Education. What should happen is, in every state, we need the Ministry of Health to take the lead with, if the state has a teaching hospital, for example, to work with the teaching hospital to ensure, and an NGO who has the capacity and is interested, to set up a sexual assault referral center. That is where these cases are handled. Having said that, what we did was we had 2 advocacy sessions with the Ministry of Education, one with the leaders in the ministry and another with school principals, to talk to them about their own understanding of the GBV law and how they can protect our children in their schools. Because the reports of our daughters getting assaulted in their schools, either by their peers or by their teachers, was getting too much. So, so we need ongoing advocates with all these agencies of government. Hello?
Yes.
Am I still with you?
No,
Okay,
you're
because
with
it
us,
disappeared.
but no, we disappeared. You are with us. You're with us.
Right. Okay. So, but the issue of seeking medical attention, that's the responsibility of, as I said, the Ministry of Health, working in collaboration with NGOs, as well as any tertiary health facility you have in the state.
Tina's question about checks and balances and ensuring that all you are promised to do is done when you disperse, like the governor's wives and the governors towards GBV. You didn't address that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we are going to be doing a lot of peer support and peer review, but the only, I wouldn't call it checks and balances. What I would say is, it is up to all of you. I don't know where that auntie is from. I don't know what state she's from, but it's up to you to work with the civil society organizations in your state to ensure that something happens. We have many states where the government has very little to do with GBV responses. It's solely on the shoulders and at the doorsteps of civil society organizations. And this is not right, because GBV responses need to be led by government and supported by civil society organizations, not the other way around. And the ideal GBV coordinating mechanisms that we should have should be those statutory agencies, which should include the Ministries of Health, Ministries of Education, the Attorney General's Office, the Ministry of Information, all of them working together with civil society organizations to provide a range of services, and the medical services, legal services, psychosocial support, rehabilitation, and so on for GBV survivors. We need to all be part of building and operating this ecosystem.
It's a village of people working together. That's where, at the point, I think I was raised a very pertinent question, which was asked earlier, but I'm just keeping it to the last. The question of when it comes to blaming the victim, what people always talk about is how the woman dressed, that the men are tempted by the way the woman dresses. So that always becomes a recurrent issue. What is your response to that constant reference to how a woman is dressed and why that can bring onto her issue of violence, sexual violence and rape?
Okay, when we start encouraging conversations about what women wear and how they were dressed, we are falling straight into the trap around male entitlement. Because a woman dresses a certain way, that entitles a man to her body. And so let us even move away from that. So, that is, as far as I'm concerned, quite nonsensical. But let us go down a couple of steps on this issue of how a woman dresses and whether she should be blamed, if something happens to her. My dear sisters and brothers who are on this call, the 3-month-old baby who was raped in Nasarawa State a few months ago, what was the baby girl wearing? Were her diapers sexy in any way? The 70, 80-something-year-old grandmothers who are being raped in different parts of the country, what is their attraction? Is it their breasts or their wrinkled thighs? When I was in a group, I was talking to a group a couple of weeks ago, very, well positioned men, and I asked them, apart from their wives and their children, the one thing that men do not joke with, that they love beyond, that's, so important to them, their cars. So if you go and report your car stolen at a police station, they just stolen my new Hummer, they just stolen my Mercedes Benz. And the policeman looks at you and says, Oga, how can you go steal your car? See the watch where you wear. Because they're wearing an expensive watch. That's how come the robbers knew that you were a rich man. So that's why they stole your car. Does that make any sense? You as a man, when you go to file that kind of report and the policeman tells you, what will you think? And if our daughters come home, God forbid, or our wives or our sisters, and they tell us this happened to me, will the first question that comes out of your mouth be, what were you wearing? Please let us stop asking this question. It does not matter. Women's bodies should not be violated. Women's lives should not be ruined. Men, right from when they are boys, need to understand what consent means, need to understand that masculinity is about taking responsibility. Men, what a true man is a true man is a provider. A true man is a defender. A true man is someone who provides shelter. And a true man is God-fearing. There is nothing godly about being a violator of women. And those of us who are also mothers of sons should not raise up our sons to have this sense of entitlement to women's bodies and women's labor. It is not right.
Thank you very much, Erelu. And we did a survey very quickly in the house. And I'm just going to quickly read. We asked people, do they want a part 2? Everybody says they want part 2 of this webinar with Erelu Bisi-Fayemi. So we're taking a yes from you on that. You promised that you could talk on and on. Okay, we'll deal with that in the admin room. But for now, I think it's important that we just take away some of the things. Your response, this last response was brilliant. You just said, if we choose to blame the victim for what they were wearing, then we can't blame babies and grandmas. Even if we did, we are only fueling male entitlement. You say we should raise our sons to be responsible, and we should make them, they should be men who take responsibility. Masculinity is not about abuse, it's about responsibility. Women's body should not be violated, right? I'm just reading my takeaways from this. The Inspector General needs to take a firm stand on the issues of gender-based violence. We must never, I repeat, we must never blame the victim.
WFM 91.7.